Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another video for the History Valley YouTube channel with your host, Jacob Berman. This is just going to be a short video because I have to go record another show. Actually, I'm the one being recorded. I'm being interviewed in about 12 minutes. So that's just about as much time as I have on this stream before I have to get off here. But there's a few things I need to clear up. So this has to do with recent videos that I've done and anything that may seem to be an apparent contradiction to some other videos that I've done, particularly with Christopher Lawson. Christopher Lawson has brought very insightful ideas to the table. He has. And the thing that I want to point out here is that I am in no way, shape, or form am I trying to refute Professor Eisenman's argument that James is in the Habakkuk Pesher. Because my argument, although it's basically an adjustment to Eisenman's argument, a minor adjustment at least, I'm saying that the Habakkuk Pesher has been redacted in the first century. And that the Morah HaZedek, the righteous teacher, or the pious teacher, was rewritten as a parallel character to James, typologically speaking. So that's what's happening here. The teacher was rewritten to parallel James. And it was speaking against Paul. That's all was going on here. It was comparing Paul to the liar by ultimately calling him a liar, or in other cases, rewriting the liar to parallel Paul, also known as the spreader of lies. So that's what's happening here. And here's how I look at it. I don't think there is a direct allusion to Jesus in the scrolls. I'm not convinced of that. However, I think an easier way of looking at it is that if James is alluded to in the Habakkuk Pesher, then why can't that be just as good? I think Jesus can be alluded to through James in the Habakkuk Pesher. Through James. That's the way I've looked at the situation. And the thing is, if you look at the last three columns 11, 12, and 13, we are told that the teacher of righteousness was not killed by the wicked priest. He escaped the clutches of the wicked priest. And that proves to me that two authors had a hand in this text, because the final three columns does not agree with the first 10 columns. Now, obviously, the final three columns are based on 2nd century BCE and 1st century BCE sources, because the scrolls in those time periods referred to the teacher as an exiled high priest. But the first 10 columns of Habakkuk Pesher refers to James as the teacher of righteousness. That's what's happening here. James is taking over as the teacher is being rewritten to parallel James, and therefore James is taking over the identity of the teacher. It's like posthumous identity theft. That's kind of how I look at it. I don't know if I said that right. I don't know if I could have put it in a better way, but that's my conclusion to all of this. I think that explains the evidence better. And then he can have his 40 years. Because he always talks about the 40 years. Like, okay, fine. If James if the teacher is being rewritten to parallel James, then we can have the 40 years through the revision of the teacher as James. We can have that be the case in which the 40 years can be transferred to James. I demonstrated last night that the succession of Seleucid kings in 128 BC following the defeat of The Seleucids at the siege of Jerusalem back in 129 BCE is the 40 years, the original one at least. The 40 years from the death of the original teacher of righteousness from 168 BCE down to 128 BCE. That is the 40 years. This simply is the 40 years. But because the teacher has been refigured to parallel James, it would seem that the 40 years was transferred into the 1st century CE. Even the Gospel sees that. The Gospels, which is basically deriving its information from the same sources I'm talking about, the Gospel, that's the reason why they have Jesus being crucified around 30, because he's supposed to represent a new version of those same 40 years. So those 40 years were refigured from a 2nd century BCE context to a 1st century CE context. That's just the way I look at it. Now, what I would like to do is I would like to straighten all of this out. Maybe if he wants to, I don't know. We'll have to see. Maybe he'll come back on here and we can talk about it. Because I would love to. Because this is there's been a slight misunderstanding, and I want to straighten all of this out. But what's funny about this is we don't even really disagree. If 10 columns, which is the majority of the Habakkuk Pesher, was added to the Habakkuk Pesher by a 1st century CE interpolator, then there really is no argument. It's kind of funny. It really is. There really is no argument here. All I'm saying is the majority of the text cannot be dated to the 1st century CE. I'm sorry, but that part is true. The majority of the text cannot be dated to the 1st century CE. Now, the 10 columns of Habakkuk Pesher, okay. That's 1st century. I'm convinced of that. I've been convinced Habakkuk Pesher's been heavily based on 1st century CE events for a while. However, it was only recently that I realized that after further analysis of the text, that 10 out of the 13 columns have been inserted into Habakkuk Pesher by a later author. And not by the same one that wrote the original one back around 63 BCE. And I know it was written on that date because at the end of the Habakkuk Pesher, it mentioned that an army of Gentiles being led by a blaspheming king had conquered Israel shortly after the defeat of the Kittim. The Kittim were the Seleucids. So, this is referring to a 63 BCE event because we know that because Pompey conquered Israel on that same year. And they were talking about, these Romans. They didn't mention the word Roman. I mean, they mentioned these army of Gentiles are worshiping gods on wooden sticks, something like that. And they burn incense to their gods, which is what the Romans did. So there we go. So I have no problem with James being in the Habakkuk Pesher, and Jesus too, as long as we say Jesus through James. Because so far, I don't see Jesus being referred to, at least distinct from James, in the Habakkuk Pesher. Unless you want to say that the 40 years are rewritten, which I suggested that earlier, possibly. Likely. Actually, not possibly or likely. True. Very true. It must have been. Obviously, it was. Look at the results. That's why the Gospels are doing what they're doing. Hello, Scripture Ripaz. He says, what's up? How you doing, man? Numbell Ever says, hi, Ripaz. And he said, peace, none bell ever. Cool. I like conversation. Lamar says peace. How you doing, Lamar? So like I said, I don't disagree necessarily. I think too much emphasis is being put on the other scrolls. Like, I feel like we can't roll them all up in the same bag. We can't say they're all first century. We can't say they're all first century BCE or second century BCE either. It's a documentary. These are documents being written over time, just like the Old Testament was. They weren't written in the same century. They just weren't. Now, if they were, this would be easier, but it's not. Too good to be true. This is one of those cases. But we can still have it both ways in a sense, as long as we understand Jesus through the lenses of James is in the Habakkuk Pesher. But he's not distinguished from him. But that doesn't change what I said recently. Scripture says, so who is the teacher of righteousness? Well, as I demonstrated earlier, he is Yeshua the Zadokite from 128. Sorry, not 128. That 128 BC is when the Damascus document was written. Oops. He was in the 170s BCE. He was a high priest of Jerusalem, as I demonstrated recently. Before I release any of my other books, I want all of you to be the first to hear this. Anyone that watches the live stream will be the first to hear this. I'm going to be writing this in academia.edu. I'm going to be publishing this material there on this. I figured this would be a better way of starting out. Like, I'm going to work my way through the scrolls, and then eventually I'll wiggle my way into the Old Testament and talk about that, then get back to the New Testament. Because right now, hold on. Scripture asked, how do you spell that last name? What do you mean? His name is just Yeshua. I mean, if it helps, Yeshua ben Onias. He's the son of Onias. I think his father is Onias the third. Don't quote me on that, because I don't remember right now. I know he's the father of one of the Oniases. I think it's Onias the third. I'm almost certain of it. Hold on a second. Correction, Onias the third is his brother. I had a feeling I got that wrong. Okay. Usually, though, the high priests are related. Okay, he's the son of Simon II. High priest from 219 to 199 BCE. So there we go. Correction made. Good thing I took a look at it. Okay, I'm going to have to be getting off here in a second. I'm just waiting to be messaged right now. So, it looks to me that that's the best way to explain all this. We're taking into account the 390 years plus the 20 years of wandering in the Damascus document. We're also taking into account the Habakkuk Pesher, at least most of it, 3/4 of the text, being aware of first century CE events. An explanation I can explain both at the same time, in my opinion, is the stronger explanation. And I'm hoping that's what I presented. Of course, the audience will be my judge. And others will judge me as well when my work becomes published and not just on video. This is a healthy conversation. This is a healthy disagreement that is reconcilable. It is. It's not like the situation that occurred between me and Ralph Ellis. All of you know how that turned out. He is not very fond of taking in criticism. So he gets a bit pissed when someone criticizes him and says that, he says other people are, anyone that criticizes him is an academic shill. Unfortunately, that's just how he thinks of anyone that criticizes him. So no matter the disagreements or the agreements, practically nearly everyone is on board with Ralph Ellis is wrong. Unfortunately, he's just one of those people that got things that much wrong. So anyway, let me take a look at some comments here behind. Numbell Elver says Genesis 21:33, the everlasting ancient God Olam, ancient vanishing point in time, or Olam from Alam, a primitive root, to veil from sight, i.e. conceal. Forgive me, I don't understand the context of what you're saying there. Like, could you tell me what the point of that was? Does that tie into something I said? Hey, Leron, how you doing? He says Allah means world. Thanks, Leron. Always a pleasure to have you here. Same with everyone else. Brett says, can't wait to read the article when published. Awesome. Patrons will be the first ones to know when it releases. Then the rest of the public will find out later. Leron says, no, wait, it's also with... He says it's also with... the ayin Hebrew word, ayin. Huh. He says, but this context, what is that? He says, okay. He says the Nikud says it's world. Thanks, Theron. Okay, I think something is going on. Okay, time for me to get off. I'll see all of you later. I'm going to be interviewed on Myth Vision podcast on James the Just is the Egyptian False Prophet, episode 2.